Alright, so yesterday I wound up doing a couple things. Spent a lot of time in boys' chat talking about property rights and looting and stuff because of the news. And I also watched the First Purge. So yeah, what does the First Purge have to do with property rights? How could it possibly tie in with property rights? So starting off, like, what the fuck are property rights? Found it kind of instructive to actually look up the Cato Institute's definition of property rights, because like you just Google property rights and the first result is the Cato Institute Handbook for legislators. Anyway, so what Cato had to say about property rights. America's founders understood clearly that private property is the foundation not only of prosperity, but of freedom itself. Thus, through common law, state law, and the Constitution, they protected property rights, the rights of people to acquire, use, and dispose of property freely. Alright, so while we, generally talk about property rights concerning individuals, somebody like owning land to build a house to live on, or to, work on, generally that's just how we think of it. And then it gets, even more complicated when you can start considering corporate personhood. That corporations under the law legally function as individual persons, even though they're made up of groups of people, and their legal function is to turn a profit. Okay, so with those sort of wrinkles, those complications in mind, as I see it, like, property rights aren't simply a matter of individual purchase of property, though that's certainly a way it functions, but the ways that really impact our lives are what the state and corporations can do to that land. And that's really what the fight is about, when the Cato Institute is publishing this shit about property rights. It's further enshrining in law, or seeking to enshrine in law, corporate control of land, of the means of production. It's keeping the capital in the capitalist's hand. Yeah, so how does it tie into the purge? Well, okay, so what is the purge, and why does it burrow itself into our brain so well? The purge is a fantasy, but it's a fantasy that's explicitly built on top of our own reality. It's taking an otherwise normal and recognizable world and just tweaking something. What if everything was basically the same as it is now, except one night a year for 12 hours, there's no punishment for crime? So the reason this captures our imagination is the reason, zombie apocalypse fiction has such a hold on our collective imagination. Like, it's the familiar world, and so we can easily imagine how, extrapolate how we would behave in that world. It isn't a pure fantasy. It's not about empowerment. It's a survival fantasy. It's imagining yourself surviving an exceptional situation. So where zombie fiction's very much about, okay, how do you deal with complete collapse? How do you deal with complete disorder? The Purge is about how do you deal with disorder that occurs within a larger order, or sanctioned disorder. So in the First Purge, it's the fourth film in the franchise, but it's the start of the story. It's the point in history where the Purge is being considered. They've gotten to the point of doing a trial run, and the setup for the story is that a behavioral scientist has this thesis that, if we just sanction violence, if we sanction antisocial violent behavior for one night, people will get their rocks off. Just get it all done, and then get down to, like, just an insanely low crime and murder rate for the rest of the year. So that's the reason it's happening. It's sanctioned by the government, and there's sort of an actual scientific enterprise in determining whether or not this idea has legs. The movie kind of does this. It has this very, like, Nashville or like Dazed and Confused structure, almost. Like, it's over a set period of time, and it follows various characters as they, experience all of the events. So it gives you this really, like, zoomed out, panoramic, like, systemic picture of what's actually going on. What winds up happening is nobody immediately does violent crime. It gets a little rougher on the streets at night, but mostly people are just trying to have a good time. And yeah, of course there's some bad actors, but anyway, people don't immediately just turn on each other. In fact, people start throwing parties. People are, like, celebrating, because for the first time in a lot of these people's lives, it's like no pressure. Like the person who is the first murder victim of the night is just a guy trying to break into an ATM because he's mad at ATM fees. So at that point where, they find out that people aren't just going to turn each other on the drop of a hat, the experiment's declared a failure. We see a brief utopian moment, when the purge actually starts, where people are able to live free because, the law is suspended. They feel free to move about. They feel free to, take what they need to survive. They feel free to celebrate with each other. It's chaotic. It's not entirely safe, but it's still an incredibly livable version of life. And once you see that the poor aren't automatically animalistic, that they won't immediately tear each other up once the prohibitions are lifted. So why is the experiment a failure when, for all intents and purposes, people's lives are improved when they're no longer worried about the law or enforcement of the law? The experiment is a failure because people were more willing to indulge in crimes against property and polite society rather than violating each other's rights. And so what the purge winds up being, as we see in the subsequent films, it while it is stated in law that it's, we're suspending laws so we can get the crime rate down to an almost non-existent level the rest of the year round, we have to go through with this. Really, it's an excuse to liquidate the poor, to liquidate the excess, quote-unquote, non-productive population. So while the concept of the purge, of this sort of ritualized state of exception is fictional, the purge shows what power and the powerful are going to act like during the state of exception, when your everyday routine and the rule of law, as far as we can call it that, are just unenforceable, unsustainable in the current moment. And while the purge depicts it as sort of enshrined in law and as this ritualistic recurring festival, the state of exception happens in real life every time there's it's usually a natural disaster or a terrorist attack. Yeah, that's not a really happy note to end on. Yeah, 5 stars. Watch The First Purge. It's kind of a perfect movie. It's fucked up. It's violent. There's a lot of healing fuck yeah moments in it. I describe it to friends as Killmonger Was Right, the movie. Yeah, go out, watch it. It's good. Have fun.